Welcome everyone to Understable Discourse, hopefully soon to be your go-to source for the best disc golf statistics and analysis on the internet. Thank you so much for being here. Now, disc golf is back with the Supreme Flight Open in Florida, and today we're going to take a look at the pros, we're going to talk about the course, and most importantly, we're going to break down the stats. So let's get into it. Now, let's be real. I said that disc golf is back, but it really truly hasn't gone away because for those hardcore fans out there like myself, we've had the Tour Down Under, we've had the typical Arizona events like Memorial and Shelly Sharp, and also, we've been seeing more and more incredible A tiers pop up every single year with handfuls of our favorite pros playing in all of them. Plus, this offseason was ripe with entertainment for each and every one of us disc golf fans. We had major contract moves, we had manufacturer shakeups, leadership changes, a new point system for the Pro Tour events, and there was even the announcement of the Go Throw Tour. So there was so much going on for all of us to follow and enjoy this offseason. Alright, enough about that. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of why we're here. The Supreme Flight Open sponsored by Discraft. While this is the first year with that particular title, it's not our first year at this course. Olympus Disc Golf Course has seen many different iterations and designs and events throughout the ages. It was established officially in 1998 and designed by Greg Hosfeld. In 2013, it saw a redesign by Mike Barnett, who kept it fresh until 2023, and at that time, Paul Macbeth and Dylan Cease came together and purchased the land and made it a permanent course in 2024 and established it officially as Olympus Disc Golf Course. Now, the course was just recently named number 80 on the list of the top 100 UDisc courses in the world, and one of the things that make it really unique is that it has a very unconventional topography for Florida courses. It's got massive, almost canyon-like features, which makes a lot of sense because it used to be a quarry. Now, a few things to note about the overall design of the course is that it requires a lot of well-placed shots. There are landing zones that almost feel ideal, and one of the things that was done from last year to this year was that they cleaned out a lot of those landing zones to reward good shots. Paul Macbeth also said they had some issues with landslides, so some of the green areas are dealing with some sloping issues, but they've been able to clean a lot of that up as well, and they even had people come in and install a number of stairs and benches just to help players and spectators alike. One of the more famous things about Olympus is just how rough the rough can be. Specifically, the sawgrass comes into mind. A number of players have mentioned that if you put a disc into the sawgrass, means you either lose that disc or you need to be willing to just kind of have your clothes and your skin ripped up while trying to retrieve it. Speaking of history, let's look at last year, because if we're ever really going to understand what we can expect from the current event, we need to take a look and understand what happened last year. And of course, your big winners were Anthony Barella and Evelina Salonen. This was AB's first Elite Series win and broke a 4-year drought for Evelina when it comes to winning on American soil. One of the special things about this event is that there is a drastic departure from the events that used to be the first of the season. We used to see events like the Memorial and Waco be used for the openers. And statistically, these were very significantly easier than Olympus. Every year at Memorial, we saw things like rounds nearing 1,100 rated and course records, and Waco got eaten alive every single year by everyone. So Olympus didn't even surrender a double-digit round last year. Very different than what we're used to. Before we go anywhere else, let's kind of address how this is going to work. First comes first, we're going to look at the course itself. There are some differences, key differences, to how things looked last year compared to how things look this year. And we're also going to look at some significant holes that are most likely going to make a big difference for the event itself. After that, we're going to move over to our returning champions, and we're going to see what made the difference for them in 2024 and how it might be able to apply to this year. And then next, it's going to be talking about the key players to watch for 2025. We're going to wrap things up by talking about who I expect to be on the podium, and we're going to look at some players that I'm keeping my eye on for this event and for this year. When looking at Olympus, it's really easy to see on the surface why it's a difficult course. Once you take a deeper dive into that, things become a bit more evident. Sitting at 10,231 feet for the MPO and 9,287 feet for the FPO, it actually isn't a super long course by tour standards. The MPO layout is a par 65, which is one less than 2024, and the FPO have a par 68 layout to tackle. In 2024, Olympus was responsible for the fourth hardest round of play for the entire season at 1.81 strokes over par. This put it just behind rounds at Northwood, Crokel, and Winthrop. Now, I will say that the Crokel field, being a little less star-studded, does inflate their difficulty a bit. As for the FPO side of things, Olympus gave them their 11th hardest round on tour, sitting at 5.74 strokes over par. But let's do a quick comparison to this year. Most of the holes really didn't change, or at least changes are relatively simple. For example, holes 11 and 15 are seeing the addition of an elevated pin for the MPO field, and hole 17 had its Mando moved up the fairway a bit closer to the actual tee, likely to protect some spectators a bit more. In a similar vein, holes 5 and 9 saw the additions of casual relief areas for the steep sections of the fairway, those cliffs that we all remember so well, and hole 3 now has an added OB zone in front of the drop zone, putting a tiny bit more pressure on the actual tee shot itself. A real big change for the FPO field is on hole 2, where their basket was actually moved from the low left side of the fairway and placed up and to the right on the hillside short of the MPO basket. It lengthened the hole itself by about 40 feet, but mostly it took away the double backhand hyzer play and forces a more technical shot into the green itself. Another decent change was the shortening of the FPO pin on hole 4 by about 120 feet. This still didn't change the par for the hole for the FPO field, so we'll see how they do with that. The three biggest changes to the course can be seen on holes 13, 16, and 18. And the change on hole 16 was mostly for spectators. The tee was shortened closer to the fairway itself and moved to an angle that takes away the inherent straightness of the hole design, but this was done mostly to accommodate for more spectators and just keep them safer. The most controversial change was done on hole 13, where they essentially flipped both the FPO and the MPO positions, which adjusted each pin by roughly 40 feet. The FPO group also now gets an elevated pin there. But what makes this controversial is that the hole was shortened for the MPO to 426 feet and changed to a par 3, and a lot of the pros who've commented on the hole seem to not like the change because it turns it into more of a poke and hope style par 3. And, with the par for the FPO division remaining unchanged, there's calls into question about the design on this hole. Last but not least, we have the most, I would say, consequential change to the course, which is on hole 18, where both landing zones down below and up top for the green itself have been shrunk. They even removed the secondary drop zone by the green, forcing players to be a bit more careful on their shot up to the top. Now, as you can see, the changes aren't massive, so I would expect very similar outcomes this year as it pertains to scoring and the stats themselves. I think that a lot of what we will see play out is going to come down really to one hole and one stretch of the course. Hole 4 at Olympus is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, for all of last year, it came up as the 7th hardest hole on the entire tour for the MPO division. Sitting at 664 feet, this par 4 requires a very specific angle and nose control to get to the ideal landing area, and even if you land perfectly, you now face yourself down a very narrow hallway with a low ceiling and OB lining the entire right side. No wonder it played 0.78 strokes over par. And as a testament to its difficulty, when it comes to holes on tour with the highest bogey rate, this one clocks in at 4th with 62% of attempts ending in a bogey or worse. On the other side of that coin, it's the 3rd hardest hole when it comes to the birdie rate, or birdie or better rate I should say, with only 1.79% of attempts being able to do so. Last year, only Cole Redolin, Ricky Wysocki, Gannon Burr, Matty O, Luke Humphreys, and Casey White pulled off the birdie. In fact, Casey White did it twice. That's kind of insane to think about. Now, I said this was the 3rd hardest hole to birdie on tour. Do you have any idea what the 2 hardest holes to birdie on tour were for 2024? Stay tuned at the end of the video to find out which those holes were, and maybe you guessed right. The reason this hole is such a problem, I think, is that it's perfectly situated in the layout to totally extinguish hot starts. I mean, if you feel good about holes 1, 2, and 3, don't worry because hole 4 is there to welcome you with a 62% bogey rate. I mean, this is the type of hole that can very easily just halt your performance for the remainder of the front 9, and I think getting through this one with a par is just as good, if not better, than getting through it with a birdie on most other holes. Holes 17 and 18 are easily the other part of the course with the most significance. Are they the last two holes of the course? Yeah, Gary, those would be significant. I get it, but it's a little bit deeper than just being at the end of the round. Hole 17 is a very tricky hole design, especially with the new mandatory position. It's the second hardest hole on the course. It has water and OB conveniently right near the ideal landing zone, and the shot into the green is no cakewalk. We saw AB take a bogey on 17 last year, which put Ricky within 2 strokes, making 18 a very important hole to play. And speaking of 18, the end of the course now has a much smaller initial landing zone. And the big key here is that there is a lot less room on the left and long for hyzers that push and fight out too much. Additionally, the landing zone up top, had the front portion of it pulled back closer to circle's edge. Not only all of that, but they removed the second drop zone at the top, which gave players a 40-footish putt to save their score. Now, traditional OB rules are in play, and that means that you can overshoot it and have upwards of a 60-foot putt back at the basket with OB right behind it on circle's edge. It should make for a very entertaining and strategic finish for most players. Looking at the course for the FPO side, aside from hole 18, there are less standout holes that have such an impact as holes 4 or 17. However, that doesn't mean the course is without its teeth. Instead of having 1 or 2 very difficult holes, the entire course plays difficult. Only 2 of the holes didn't average under par for the FPO in 2024. Now, let's shift gears for a quick moment. Why do we care about statistics so much? Why am I sitting here making this video for you? Why am I dealing with this ugly background and a brand new setup and doing all this work, which I love doing, by the way, but it's a lot. I remember sitting back in the middle of the 2024 season, and I came across one of the age-old arguments: who's the GOAT? Is it LeBron James or is it Michael Jordan? Now, both analysts argued back and forth, all the usual things. After minutes and minutes of arguing, it descended into what always it goes to, which is how many rings does Jordan have? How many points does LeBron have? How many finals MVPs for Jordan? Offensive win shares for LeBron? And it always comes down to stats, every single time. Then, later in the season, we heard the very similar debate in the disc golf side. Whose season was better, Gannon's 2024 or Macbeth's 2015? And we descended into the same arguments: strength of field, elite wins, major wins, individual performance metrics, and once again, it came back, as it always does, to statistics. Now, for all time, statistics, I think, are always going to be the ink that we use to write the history of our sport, disc golf. Players come and go, but stats are always going to remain. And also, to further our sport, and as it gets bigger, the more important stats and analysis are going to become. And you know what that means? You, right there, right now, you're on the ground floor with me, analyzing all of this past the typical, ooh, that stat is cool, because we have plenty of people in this sport who can see a stat, read a stat, think it's cool, but we don't really have anyone sitting down and trying to talk about why it's important. We're diving deeper here. We're finding the real meaning. Okay, enough of being serious there. Let's get back to what we're talking about. Our past champions, I think, are going to help tell the story of what is and is not a marker of success on this course. And with a course so heavily focused on landing zones, staying safe, and smart play, we need to look very closely at fairways hit, scramble rate, and C1 in regulation. For AB, he led the field in 2 categories. He had the lowest bogey percentage at only 7%, and his C1 in regulation was 44%. After that, he was 4th in fairways hit at 74%, 2nd in C2 in regulation at 65%, and 2nd in strokes gained tee to green. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what are strokes gained tee to green? Yeah, that's a complicated stat. And we're going to be taking a deeper dive into that sometime later this season to see what it's all about, how it's calculated, and just why I think it's important. Might it be the most meaningful statistic to determine who's going to win an event? We'll talk about that later. But to be very simple about it now, it represents the number of strokes that a player gains during a round compared to the rest of the field. Still too complicated for you? Don't worry, we'll get into it later. It's basically the higher the number, the better it is. But here's an interesting stat that's kind of missing. AB was only 82% from C1X, and that's down from 87% for his season average. He was also 9th in C2 putting with 42%, which is 9% better than his season average. But more on putting later. Let's take a look at Evelina next. Evelina is arguably one of the best throwers of the disc when it comes to the FPO division, and she might actually be the best thrower of the disc, but there's more time in her career to earn that designation. She led the field in 4 stat categories. She was first in birdie rate at 44%, she was first in parked percentage at 24%, C1 in regulation at 50%, and strokes gained tee to green, yep, that magical thing we talked about earlier, at 31.76 strokes. That is insanity. That's approaching 2 strokes per hole on average against the field. She was also third in fairways hit at 75%, third in lowest bogey rate at 15%, and also third in C2 in regulation at 63%. Now, as for putting, we know the drill with her. She was 67% from C1X, and she was 0% from C2, but clearly, that didn't matter here. Something they both shared in common with their wins last year is that neither one of them was actually very good at scrambling during the event, but I suppose that's probably a good thing considering they kept it in the fairway so much, and ultimately, I think they dominated, a thrower's course. They hit their landing zones, they didn't struggle, with the elevation changes, they accomplished the goal they set out to do. Now, what does all this actually point out for us other than just winning at so many stat categories actually means you're going to win the event? Because that's obvious. It's helping us understand that not all stats are created equal when it comes to events. Just because something is vital one place doesn't mean it's always vital at another course at the same level. We'll talk all about this for the 2025 season, so get used to it. But here's the actual example for this course. I've said several times now this is a thrower's course. It's not really a putter's course. And if you look at the top 35 best C1X performances at last year's event for the MPO field, you'll see that only 4 of those players were in the top 10 finishers of the event. In fact, both first and third place finishers were not even in the top 35 best C1X putters for last year. So you can see that same thing actually happening on the FPO side as well. And this tells us that C1X putting isn't really a statistic that we need to look at as hard for this particular event to pull meaningful insights for this year. Now, I'll caveat that by saying that we only have 1 year of history for the event, and also we're looking at the first Pro Tour event of the year, so is putting going to be as good as it could be? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have a more complete picture of this after this season. There are some stats that I think really showed they indicate where the winner might come from. At the top of that list, you're going to have to look at C1 in regulation. If you look at last year, for the MPO, of the top 20 finishers in C1 in regulation, 10 were in the top 10, and 15 of them were in the top 20 finishers for the event. For the FPO side, of the top 10 in C1 in regulation, 9 of them were in the top 10 finishers of the event. So obviously, when it comes to Olympus, getting into Circle 1 in regulation is crucial for success. Now, last year we saw both hot rounds come in at around 8 under. I think that's a fair score to expect of this year, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to predict that we see our first ever double-digit under par this year at Olympus. The field is improving more and more every year, and as the pros get more shots at this track, I think we're going to start to see them adapt, and it's bound to happen by someone. Who's going to do it? I don't know, but I think it's going to be double digits this year. Speaking of the pros, let's shift and talk about them a bit. I mean, there are plenty of notable players in the field, but I want to highlight a few of them specifically that I think are going to do pretty well at this event. And I'll save us some time by saying that both AB and Evelina are on that list for obvious reasons. Their games fit the course really well, and we're going to see if they're going to be able to come out and get the job done a second year in a row. Evelina says she's been working on her putting, and AB said that he's been replaying last year in his head over and over and over again. So we'll see if they can do it. Can they get the 2 wins in a row? I think Missy Gannon is also a legitimate threat at Olympus because she's kind of the pinnacle of consistency and balance. She led the FPO field in fairway hit percentage for the season last year at nearly 81%. Her distance really isn't top tier, but she's not the greatest putter of all time, but she's great at kind of all the stat lines across the board. And on a course with so much teeth like Olympus, I think she can sit back, play her game, and just slowly pass everyone as they kind of fall down the leaderboard, and her consistency and just her overall professionalism and experience take over. Holland Hanley hit another solid stretch last year and showcased her ability to dominate at times, and I think she has all of the necessary power and skill to be a competitor each and every week. The big key is going to be if she can be consistent for all 3 rounds here. The same can also be said of Ella Hansen, who has all the power, but will she stay consistent? Last year at this course, she showed us that she really couldn't, and maybe this year she's going to change that narrative. Another person to look at here is Silva Saarinen, who is joining the FPO side on American soil earlier this year, which I'm stoked to see. I think she, isn't really known for having a ton of power and distance, but she's known for winning. And that's enough sometimes. And as a legitimate contender for players to watch in 2025, I think she's got all the skill sets necessary to win this event. The question will be if her lack of experience on this course and her first event, in the United States this year is going to be a detriment to her or not. Lastly, I have to touch on Paige Pierce. I don't know what to do or what to think about her. I mean, 1 minute she's looking into the camera and calling herself the favorite to win the event, and the next she's telling us that winning might not be the most important thing to her anymore. She has all the experience she needs to win this and the skill to do it, but just it feels like we don't know what Paige we're going to get. Jumping over to the MPO side, let's talk about another player who's close to the all-time major record, Paul McBeth. He's one of the course owners, which I don't think grants you a ton of advantage, but it definitely helps. I mean, anyone who watched the Jomez practice round could tell you that every single throw that every one of them threw, that guy knew before the shot even landed if it was going to be left, if it was going to be long, too far right, too short. And also, Paul said he's ready to compete this year, and I want to see that happen. Gannon Buhr kind of left the entire tour last year with the fear that they may never win another event again, and I think he's trying to help us figure out if the Ice Age has truly started. But he has every skill you could ever want for this event and more. But will he be able to take his hot finish to 2024 and immediately translate it to 2025? That remains to be seen. And perhaps Gannon's biggest roadblock is going to be Ricky Wysocki. I mean, he's got the fire lit underneath him right now with a new sponsor. He just won the Shelley Sharp in a relatively competitive field, and he knows how to win at this event. I mean, he was right on AB's tail last year. You know who else was close last year? Aaron Gossage. And boy, oh boy, is everyone talking about Aaron Gossage right now. He's one of the best throwers on tour, and with putting being less meaningful at this event than others, I think he's an obvious contender. And with his new spin putt, he might just be pretty dangerous, although we've also seen him 5-putt on the green this year already. But we're all saying that he's next up for a big win. Maybe this event can be the one for him. All right, enough beating around the bush. I think you've made it this far. You deserve to know who I think is going to be on the podium for the Supreme Flight Open. So let's start with the FPO side of things. I think coming in third place, I have to go with Missy Gannon. I think her consistent play will outlast those around her. I think she's going to get first of many podium finishes for the year. It's going to be a great event for her. Coming in second place is going to be Evelina. I know, I want her to repeat win as well. But I think that the putting catches up to her a little bit for this year. Plus, she's only getting second because coming in first is Holland Handley, who I think is going to put together 3 consistent rounds and take down the event. And I'm thinking that she's going to finish probably somewhere in the 15 to 18 under range. I think she locks it in for this event. Now, moving over to the MPO side, coming in third place, you're probably thinking earlier that I forgot all about him, but I didn't, and that's Calvin Heimberg. I think he's back this year. I think he's healthy. He's ready to wipe the 2024 season out of memories, and I think that he's going to get that started at the Supreme Flight Open. I think he's too smart of a player, too consistent, too skilled to not capitalize here. I think we're going to get a nice sneaky third place out of Calvin. The battle for first is going to be a very, very hard one, but ultimately coming in second, I think, is going to be Gannon Buhr. The dominance from 2024 is going to come into 2025 strong, and we see him doing his thing. I bet he's going to have a tough first round and get himself on the third card, and he's going to rise up to be on lead card in round 3. It's going to be an insane finish for him, but I think he comes up short in second place. Winning the entire thing, the Supreme Flight Open, I think this year, and starting the new rivalry that we all need, is going to be Ricky Wysocki. I mean, imagine that story. He switches to Discraft and then goes out to win his first big event that they happen to be the sponsor for. It kind of writes itself. I think he has every skill needed to win here, and they're going to be on full display for all to see. I think it's Ricky's to take down. And I'll wrap up the player talk with a few people that I think you should keep your eye on this weekend, and probably eye on this season. First, Don't sleep on Harry Chase. I mean, that guy is a proven winner with a track record of success throughout the entire Northeast. He was the runner-up for the Q Series championship last year, and it's his first full year touring. I think he's going to crush it. He's not some young guy coming in at like 999. He's coming in well into his thousands, ready to take control on tour. And speaking of crushers, keep your eye on Lucas Oberholzer Hess. That kid can literally throw the stamp off of discs. When he's dialed in, I think he can play very well in high pressure situations. Last year, he played in a few tour events, and he cashed at Idlewild, Ledgestone, and at Worlds with top 50 finishes at both Ledgestone and Idlewild. So keep your eye on Lucas. And like I said, disc golf is back. You know, it's time to sit back and watch our favorite players at the top courses. And speaking of the top courses, here's your chance. Do you remember earlier the question that I asked you? Do you know what two holes on the MPO field last year, 2024, had the lowest birdie percentage? What two holes were the hardest to birdie on all of the tour? I'll give you a chance. Go ahead. 3, 2, 1. And the answer is, yeah, let's see if you got it right. So the answers are 18 long, at New London with a 1.46% under par percentage. And then hole number 12 at Northwood Black, surprise, surprise, with a 1.75% under par percentage. The best question here is, did you get it right? Did you get one of them right? I'm willing to bet that you got hole 12 at Northwood Black if you're a real fan. But hole 18 at New London, I've been there. It's no joke. Good luck getting a birdie on that hole. Did I get it right with my choices for this weekend? Let me know in the comments who you have winning the entire event. Thank you so much again for joining me for this slightly unpolished, odd background, trying to figure it out for the first time, first episode. We're going to be growing this thing up. We're going to be grinding throughout the year. I want to add things like when I talk about holes, I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about. We're going to add some fun stuff. I might put in there a meme on occasion, but we're going to do all those fun things. I really appreciate you listening to this episode and partnering with me to enjoy the stats for 2024. What you can do to help support me is please check out the Instagram for here. It's at Understable_Discourse. Where we're going to post daily Pro Tour stats content and analysis content. We're going to have things where we post some trivia questions based on players, based on different tour stops. We're going to do some live reactions to stats during events. It's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure to go check that out. And the last thing you can do is you can subscribe down below. That'd be super helpful. But thank you for being here. Appreciate your time, and just have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.